Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to ladies and gentlemen, no matter where you are. I hope you guys are well. Welcome to ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series. My name is Guma Sylvester, a MASA representative, and I will be your MC for today. Firstly, I would like to thank ARCHIDEX 2021 for giving MASA an opportunity to conduct this session. We are pleased to have this collaboration with ARCHIDEX. For those who don't know what MASA is, I hope you can lend your ear as I explain further. MASA stands for Malaysian Architecture Student Alliance and is a non-profit student committee operating directly under Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, or PAM, consisting of student representatives from all architecture institutes in Malaysia. It is a platform where Malaysian architecture students join forces to learn, share with appreciation of the past, generating sustainable living in the present, and bringing unlimited possibilities to the future. Our mission is to develop an effective platform and network between Malaysian architecture students and professionals. We also serve as liaisons between students and PAM. Now let us greet our special guests for today. We present to you once again the chairman of PAM Education Committee, Architect Adrianta Aziz, and the one and only Datuk Ken Yang, who will be talking to us on the topic Designing for a Resilient Future based on the science of ecology. To begin with, let's welcome Architect Adrianta Aziz to say a few words.
Thank you, Guma.
Nice to meet you again. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Guma. How about you?
I'm good as well. Okay.
How's your study? Good?
It's going well, actually. Yes.
Very well. Thank you, Guma, for your introduction. So, good morning.
Okay.
To all the viewers, welcome back to the ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series organized by MASA, Malaysian Architecture Student Alliance, and supported by Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, PAM, and also Acacia Committee Architectural Education, ARCHIE. And thank you to the CIS and the organized under platform ARCHIDEX Online. So welcome back. My name is Architect Adrianta Aziz. On behalf of PAM Education Committee, we would like to say welcome to all of you to the ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series today, 4th of October, to celebrate our World Architecture Day on the first Monday of October in parallel with UN World Habitat. So this year, the themes namely Clean Environmental for a Health World. So the UIA hopes to contribute the global conversation on the 2030 development agenda for focusing on three key areas. It's about housing, public spaces, and their relation to climate change. So today we have a very special guest, that one and only Dato Dr. Architect Ken Yang. So he is the Executive Director at TR Hamzah and Young Sdn Bhd. He is both an architect and ecologist, known for his innovative ecology-based signature eco-architecture and master plans that have a distinctive verdant green aesthetic that are beyond conventional architecture. He trained at the Architectural Association School in United Kingdom, and his doctorate is from Cambridge University on ecological architecture and planning. Well, he has authored over 12 books on green architecture. Awards received include the Agahan Award, Malaysian Institute of Architects Gold Medal, Malaysian Government's Merdeka Awards, and he holds the prime distinguished professorships at Illinois University. The Guardian newspaper names him as one of the 50 people who could save the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, students, with this talk title today, Designing for Our Resilient Future, based on the science of ecology, we would explore green designs through the lens of an architect as an ecologist as well. So as we move to a brighter future, designing with a singularly technocentric approach is no longer the best way forward. A green design of the future must avoid a singularly technocentric design approach that focuses primarily on engineering, such as near net zero energy, net zero carbon, net zero water, net zero waste, or on green accreditation system such as LEDD or etc. The way forward is to be more inclusive in terms of our mindset in designing, to be concurrently technocratic and ecocentric, where design is based on the science of ecology. The rationale is that the planet's ecology is the final environmental baseline upon which all humanity's activities take place, where their negative impacts affect the planet's health. The ecocentric approach redefines designing the built environment as applied ecology. Well, in designing and constructing as a resilient and sustainable future for humanity and for all living species and their environments, the human-made world must be repurposed, remade, and recovered to become a synergistic part of nature and be designed through ecomimicry to emulate, replicate, and augment the attributes of ecological system as constructed ecosystem. Design principles to achieve this are presented and illustrated by built and designed experimental prototypes. Well, students, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome Dato Dr. Architect Kenya. Dr. Ken, the floor is yours now.
To all of you. My topic, as mentioned, is designing for a resilient planet. And if you read the background literature to climate change and the COP21 in Paris, it'll become clear to all of you that we don't have very much time left, maybe about 20, 30 years. And well, I might be pushing daisies by then, but for all of you young people, my hope is with you. My biggest disappointment is the way that architecture has still been taught, and that I believe that we should all learn ecology, and because that changes the way you look at the world, changes the way you design, changes the curriculum of schools of architecture. So I hope that something will be done. Now, I can't change it. Okay, this summarizes basically my method of work, because my research, as you know, is on ecological design and planning. And then I sit down and discuss with my colleagues what are the general concepts and specific concepts and design systems and technical devices, and then our project. Then we interpret these ideas and concepts in our design projects, and we get them built, and not all of them, because you know, practice isn't as straightforward as it is, as appears to be. And so we test out ideas with built systems, and sometimes we're inhibited by the client. And then when our project's finished, we evaluate it, we evaluate the outcome, and then from there produce my publications. So, and then the publications then, while sorting out the publications, it gives us the opportunity to identify further research. And so we go back to do more research. So if you like, this is a cyclic process we go through. Now, I'm going to discuss 3 design principles that guide and drive our work. One is on ecocentricity, the second is biointegration, the third is ecomimicry, and the fourth is eco-infrastructure. Ecocentricity is essentially designing based on the science of ecology. And second, biointegration is about the synergistic fusing of constituents. And then the third is ecomimicry, which is the mimicry of ecosystem attributes. And the fourth is eco-infrastructure, which is about the key ecological infrastructures which need to be integrated together. I'm going to discuss these in greater detail as I go along. Now, ecocentricity is the science of ecology as the basis for designing, making, operating, regenerating, and reintegrating our built environment. Now, everything starts with the biosphere. The biosphere is this thin film which surrounds the planet, and this is where all organisms live. Within the biosphere are the biogeochemical cycles. I'm sorry for the wrong spelling mistake. There's energy and material resources. And of course, within the biosphere, there are ecosystems, which are units in nature. And so the biosphere consists of a number of organic and inorganic constituents. Essentially, it consists of communities of plants and animals and the physical environment. The community of plants and animals is the biological constituents or the biotic constituents, and the physical constituents are the abiotic constituents. Now, within this scheme of things, there's us as human beings. We are obviously part of the communities of plants and animals, but we're very different. We're the most powerful of all species as we're able to, change landscapes, change waterways, deforest the planet. And now we're so significantly changed the planet's climate, and that there's projected that hopefully in 30 years time, the increase in temperature of the planet would not exceed 1.5 degrees, but it's likely it will. And then we as a biotic constituent, as one of the organisms in the planet, make things. We make more things than any other species in nature. We contaminate the earth with things. Now, the built environment in this context refers to not just buildings, but refers to cities, urban areas, transportation systems, structures, artifacts, and even food. And so, if you like, the relationship between the biosphere and our built environment is that the built environment takes in inputs from the biosphere and discharges outputs. And if you articulate this a little bit more, then inputs consist of energy, water, materials, food, including people. And then outputs would be energy, materials, people, the built system itself. At the end, it was used for life. And the built environment has three levels of impacts. The first impact when it's made, operational impact when it's being used, and there's the end impacts at the end of its useful life. So now, what happens is that the outputs that we throw away into the environment gets thrown back into the biosphere. We talk about throwing things away, but there's no away. The away is the biosphere itself, because the earth itself is the closed system. And so as we continue to make things, could continue to make emissions, we throw away rubbish, throw away plastics, we contaminate, and the very the very environment that we live in. And so that is the cause of the environmental degradation. So now we need to biointegrate. The principle of biointegrate is that if we're able to biointegrate everything that we make and do with the environment in a seamless and benign way, there won't be any environmental issues. And so the crux of ecological design is effective biointegration. And biointegration is both physical and systemic. Now, I draw an analogy between what we do and what doctors in the medical field do with prosthetic devices. A prosthetic device is something that is artificial. It is synthetic, it is human-made. but it's attached to a host organism, which is the human body. Now, everything then depends on effective integration of the prosthetic device with the host organism. Now, if it's not effective, then either the prosthetic device breaks down or the host organism is hurt. And so that is the principle of prosthetic devices. Now, by analogy, our built systems, our technology, our artifacts, our semi-artificial systems are prosthetic devices. They are artificial, it is human-made, it is synthetic. So then the question is, what is its equivalent host organism? It's very simple. The host organism equivalent is the biosphere itself. So then everything depends on effective integration of our built systems with the host organism being the biosphere. If it's not effective, that's impairment to the environment happens. And so for effective integration, if building environment must become part of nature. Now it's alienated from nature. Look at the room that you're in at the moment. It is different, it's separate, it is isolated from nature. And my thesis here is that the built environment must become a human-made ecosystem. So that leads me to the third point, which I call ecomimicry, and that our built environment needs to be remade to become part of nature. And mimicry basically means emulating, replicating, and augmenting ecosystem attributes into the built system. And this is very important, and I just want to emphasize this because if we don't emulate and replicate and augment ecosystems, we then becomes alienated from nature. By alienation, then it contaminates, it affects, it changes, radically affects the natural environment, and this is when the impacts affect every aspect of our lives. Affect the air, affects the water, affects the land that we live in. So I started to do research on ecosystem attributes that we need to emulate. So here's a list. It's not a complete list. It's a partial list. We have to emulate ecosystems, biological structure, biodiversity, connectivity and nexus, provision ecosystem services, biointegration, responsiveness to climate, use and cycling materials, hydrology, symbiosis, hemostasis, food production, and succession. So there are other aspects, but these are some of the key ones that I can identify. So let me start with the first attribute, which is the biological structure. Now, I already mentioned that the nature, the ecosystem consists of biotic constituents and abiotic constituents. And the key is, if we integrate the human society with nature, then the idea was that the built environment that results is a hybrid ecosystem. So by bringing these two together, the human communities and abiotic constituents, we create what we call, sorry, that was the wrong slide. Then the idea was to make cities and buildings and structures into constructed ecosystems. Now, I started to look at patterns of introducing biotic constituents into the built environment. So the upper row of patterns would be, for instance, the first one is where we put everything, all the biotic constituents in one location. That's in Central Park in New York. The second is a dispersed planting spotty pattern. That's in Georgian London, where you have a series of green squares, Bedford Square, Euston Square, Russell Square, Tavistock Square, and so forth. The third is a stepping stone relationship where the patches of greenery are close to each other but not connected. And the fourth is the one where the vegetation is connected and not that you have a series of ecological corridors and ecological fingers. The bottom row shows the equivalent with buildings. You can either put all the greenery at the biotic constituent in one location, or second is one of intermixing where you use the patchy relationship. The third is the stepping stone relationship. And the fourth is the integrated, where the vegetation connected. Now, ecology sees the last one as preferred because by being connected, um, there is greater mobility, interaction between the species of both flora and fauna, and that by being connected, there is a greater pool of natural resources to be shared among the species. By having a larger pool of resources, it engenders a much more stable ecosystem, and therefore it is the preferred pattern. And of course, we should need to integrate both to the hinterland as well as to the lowest parts of the building. This is a scheme that I did back in 2099 for a competition scheme in Singapore. We didn't win the competition, but the idea, competitions for us are, I feel like, opportunities to do research and experiment. And so for this building, I had a ramp, a vegetated ramp that goes all the way up the building. So these are a set of plans. The vegetation winds its way up to the right to the top of the building. And that then I thought that as you reach a certain level where it is the same level as the roofs of the adjoining buildings, we can then bridge across the roof and green that building as well. And so eventually this becomes the catalyst for making the city green. The second, so the second property attribute is biodiversity. And now, nature is very diverse, whereas our human systems are simplified systems. If you look into the building that you're in, then you realize that there's the only biotic constituents is you and the bugs and the germs. So where's the other constituent? So one of the things I start wherever I do a project is to look at this diagram, if you like. It's an indication of the level of biodiversity of the location. So UK is about 52 degrees above the equator, and you can see it is not that biodiverse compared to what it is in the equator, like in Singapore or Malaysia, which is about 1 degree above the equator. And so our design work then starts with creating habitats within built environment. Habitats could be green roofs, vertical green, green sky cores, green atriums, green areas at ground level, green links to the hinterland. And and the last is the eco-cell, which is the invention that we started to develop some years back. And so if you look into the left-hand column, these are the benefits. It reduces the city's heat island effect, enhances the local biodiversity, it sequesters the greenhouse gases, it enables biophilic benefits to humans, and improves the microclimate of the facade and at the edges of the building, and reconnects fragmented habitats. And so these are some of the benefits. And so that's what we do. When we design, we ask, where are we going to put the benefits in the building, and which part of the building, where we're going to locate the habitats in the building, and where and how we're going to design these habitats. This is a project that we finished about a year and a half ago. And the white squares show where the habitats are on balconies in the building, in the roofs and on the ground. And right-hand side of this diagram are the different types of habitats. We have a landscape promenade, landscape balconies, the green ground patches, and external landscaping, eco-cell. The building is that shape is like two 15, 16-story buildings which are separate from each other because of this axis between the monument by the waterfront and the square. And so that's the urban design explanation for the building. In between two buildings is this promenade, which have seating areas, which have planting, and above the on the facade of the building are the balconies and the green balconies. So basically the two axes, the main axis, which is the one on the right-hand side, which is the boulevard that leads to the Prime Minister's residence. And then the second axis is from the square, the sort of circular, the roundabout that goes all the way down to the monument. So this plan shows it more clearly, the central axis to the Prime Minister's residence and the secondary axis to the monument by the waterfront. Prime Minister's residence is the image on the right-hand side. So with this project, we started to locate habitats, and these are different habitats in the building form. The two buildings are almost symmetrical, they're like chevron shape, but not exactly symmetrical. They're asymmetrical because of the shape of the site and the dimensions of the site. And so we prepare what we call a biodiversity matrix, a biodiversity target matrix. So as you can see on the left-hand side in the red box, that's the first thing we do. We create habitats within our development. And secondly, we identify native fauna that we want to bring back to the site that is not hazardous for human beings, whether for feeding, for breeding, or for refuge from prey. Having identified the fauna, that becomes the left-hand axis. We try to then identify the flora that will attract the fauna. And having identified that, we then integrate all of them together and look at where they interact for each of the habitats. And that provides the basis from which we design the habitats and the landscape components. So this is, if you like, the ecological biodiversity approach in which differentiates what we do from other architects who just put vegetation in the buildings. Most architects put vegetation in buildings as decorative items, which is actually an anathema to an ecological architecture. So here it is. You can see the axis. You can see the Millennium Monument, which is that spire at the bottom of the waterfront, which was also designed by us about 8 years earlier. And then there's the roundabout, and then there's the famous bridge, beautiful bridge, which is a copy of what Calatrava does. And in plan, you can see the axis down to the monument, and around the monument are the Ministry of Finance buildings and the waterfront in front of it. We wanted to shape the building so that it is, we depart from the conventional orthogonal modernist building, and so it is faceted, and then where it facets, we punch holes to create balconies and terraces that people from inside the building can actually go out in the open air, and then along the folds of the facets we would slice it, so that this articulates the facade. The pattern we use is actually a double skin wall, and the outer wall is glass panels with a white fritted pattern. And in Malaysia, the cultural identity is extremely important. So we took the pattern from a woven cloth called songket, and that is the Malay cultural identity to the building. And this is what the pattern, the fritted glass looks like on the left-hand side. It's not butt jointed; they are separated, by a few inches, so that hot air can go out. And then the second image shows what it looks like from inside the building. And then on the right-hand side is the structure that supports the outer glass panel, and that's the passageway for servicing for cleaning the inner facade and cleaning the outer facade. Now the energy intensity is 136 kilowatt hours, 0.18 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum, whereas an average office building in the tropics uses about 210 to 250 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. And so in that sense, we are about 70% less than what is, what is the baseline energy consumption. Then on the west side of the building, we angle the facade a little bit so that it addresses the western sun. And this is what the western facade looks like. And we have more balconies, facing the that side of the building. And then we started looking into ways in which we could bring the greenery continuously from the building, from the third floor down to the, not just to the ground floor, but all the way down to the basement levels. And so this is an idea that we developed about 10 years earlier. What you see here is the master plan we did for competition for Kowloon Waterfront, which we didn't win. But the idea was to have voids that we cut on the podium that goes all the way down into the lowest parts of the building, and we bring vegetation and we bring various climatic factors, aspects into the insides of the building. One of the ideas we had for this master plan was to have what we call pier towers, towers that sit on piers that stick out in the waterfront. So you can see the pier towers on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side of this plan. And then the roof extends across to the rest of Hong Kong Island. And so you can see the ecological bridge on the right-hand side. And so these eco cells do for 5 things. It gives opportunity for vertical integration of greenery, provides opportunity for rainwater harvesting, provides natural ventilation, brings daylight. And at the bottom of the eco cell, you can put an eco machine like the one that invented by John Todd, or you can put a biosphere. And so for this project, you can see the vegetation goes all the way down in a ramp down to the lower parts of the building, and that this is what it looks like as the vegetation weaves this way down when it reaches the ground floor to the basement level. Now, I showed earlier on, the habitats we create the building, we create with a medium-rise building. Next question then is, how do we apply this to the high-rise? And so this is a project that is now under construction. It's a 36-story building. We start by doing research on the surrounding ecological context. And from there, our site is that little red dot. And that gives us clues on what vegetation we want to bring back in, what fauna we want to bring back into the locality, and what fauna we should use. And so again, this is the habitat diagram. In the building, we have habitats which is on the ground level, habitats in this green wall, habitats in the green court, habitats on the uppermost level. And that the species we want to attract this time is dragonflies and butterflies at the lower floors, songbirds on the middle floors, and migratory birds on the upper floors. And so if you like, this is the biodiversity matrix for a vertical building. The next attribute is ecosystems, connectivity, and nexus. And so going back to this earlier diagram, the idea of ecological nexus is that we would have an ecological corridor, if you like, in as much as we can, if it's a plan, and we have ecological fingers that eat into the urban areas. And with the building, and would then spiral it and continuously wrap it around the building to go all the way up to the roof of the building, to be interconnected and to be linked. And so this is a concept drawing we did where we show that yes, we need to link the city, all the green areas in the city together. So when people ask me, if you were to green a city, what would you do? Well, the first thing I would do would be to try and link all the green areas together. Regent's Park to Hyde Park, to all the green areas in the city. It would be extremely difficult. We have to use eco bridges and eco undercrofts, but that's the whole idea where we balance the biotic with the abiotic. Then when we reach a building, then we should go up the building continuously, not just at the ground level, but up to the top of the building. So this is the idea, this is the concept of what an ideal eco-city should be. So back to this building that I showed earlier on, where the vegetation climbs all the way up to the top of the building. This was, I think I did this back in 1999. And so it wasn't until 2006, 2007 that we finally got the opportunity to implement this idea. This is a concept drawing. So this time we put a walkway next to the vegetation, the ramp, so that people can service and can walk around the building without going through the usable areas, user areas. And so this was a concept drawing showing the vegetation as a ramp, a planter box, and that with the walkway on the side of it. And so this is, here it is completed. You can see the walkway, people walking around the vegetation, sun shading on top, and the glazing of the building on the right-hand side. Now, the idea was that as we ramp up the building, with every facade, we climb a floor. And so this way, the vegetation, weaves its way up the building. And we started to call this a park in the sky because, it is all linked and people can walk. And if you stretch it out, it's about 1.3 kilometers long. So it is it's a linear park. And this is what it looks like in certain parts of the building. And that from a distance, you can see how it climbs a floor. The building on the far left is a building designed by the famous Japanese architect Kisho Kurokawa, who's my friend actually. I invited him to speak at Cambridge University School of Architecture back in 1970. And that this is in the 1 North District of Singapore. And here's the actual building itself. And this is the vegetation that climbs up to the top of the building in a continuous way. This is one of the landscape bridges, landscape ramps on the facade of the building. And that, well, to avert the boredom of a linear park, at corners, some of the corners, I would open it out to create terraces. I call them some mini plazas or pocket parks. And so that, that's a ramp, and then it opens out to the park into little plazas, and then it goes around the building again, working its way up to the top of the building. And so you see this square here, in these are the floor plans of the building, and that the shape of the building and the shape of the site was given by the original master planner, who is Zaha Hadid, and she basically set the building limits and building constraints and the built form limitations to the building. And the red squares here shows the terraces and the balconies to the building. And on the right hand side is one of these balconies. People can actually go out and have a puff and a cigarette, or they have the lunch or the breakfast, or or tea. And so it's a nice shaded, pleasant space between the inside of the building and the outside of the building. we adopted the idea for a complex. We work in London, so we have a series of interweaving balconies and sky courts. Now, the project is actually 2 buildings which are linked by bridges. And so this is the south side of the building next to green. I should have linked the green in the building to this patch on the ground, but at that time I didn't have the opportunity to do it. At the mid-level, I have a roof garden. This is at the mid-level roof garden. And then you can see the view of the building from the top. I'm sorry, it's not a very clear slide, but you can see the sky courts on the bottom. You can see the mid-level garden. And then there's the rooftop garden where people can actually sit, and it gives a terrific view of the environment and the surrounding urbanscape. Now, in Singapore, to get a rating, one of the criteria is, they call it the green criteria, where the greenery in the building has to be more than the greenery on the ground that it sits on. And so the minimum criteria is 6, whereas in this project with the spiraling landscaping, we reached 12.2. So we almost double what is required by the authorities to achieve a platinum rating. And this is very important because, even though whether you work with BREEAM or work with LEED, these are just guidelines. We should exceed it as much as we can. And so the buildings actually consist of two separate blocks, A and B, linked by this the skin, and in between is an atrium. And so here, just looking up at the atrium, atrium is the glass roof. The glass roof is operable so that on a normal day, a hot air can go out, but if it rains, it has sensors that automatically shuts it. And so here's the atrium, here's the glass roof on top of it. But on a normal day, it just opens out so the hot air can go out. And then the two blocks are linked by a bridge. And so this is a bridge that links the two blocks. And this is the bridge seen from the inside of the building. And this is a view from the atrium looking out to the external wall. But one of the experiments we did with this project is what we call a diagonal light shaft, where we cut a void going all the way down the floor, down to the street level. And on the right-hand side is the view of the shaft from the lower floors. And this is looking down to the street level. And so this enables this opportunity to bring daylight into the inner parts of the building, but it's an experiment. It's not 100% effective. And that, where you see on the left hand on the plan, the rectangle is there's a light shaft. On the right hand side is the simulation of the daylight intensity. And you can see the floor plan is basically too deep, and that's a defect of the scheme. But we had to meet the required floor area required by the client. So we had to end up having fairly deep floor plates, but we could obviously have a much more peripheral usable spaces, just like in Germany, where in Germany no desk is permitted to be more than 7 meters away from the external glass wall. So most office buildings in Germany are either 15 to 18 meters from glass to glass. Now this is looking up from the street. You can see it goes right to the top of the building, and you can see the atrium roof on top. So back to the EcoCell idea, and we had the EcoCell here, and it's located this part of the floor plan. And here it is, it weaves its way up, going all the way down to the basement level. The next property that we should try and emulate and replicate is ecosystem services. Ecosystem services is a term that ecologists came up with in the year around 2000 to describe things that nature does for the planet without human intervention. And so these are the things that nature does for us. It produces oxygen, it maintains the biological and genetic diversity, purifies water, the storage, cycling, and global distribution of fresh water, regulates chemical composition. That's a whole list of aspects, that nature does. Now, these are done by nature for us, for the planet, without human intervention. It's a massive task. We should be thankful for nature, but they're not all visible. And so unless you're an ecologist or a natural, environmental naturalist, you won't be aware of what's happening. And so, things that happen outside the room that you're in is a lot more complex than you think it is. And that these are amazing things that the planet does that we're not aware of. Now, back to my idea that we should try and mimic these. Then you suddenly realize that it is impossible. There's no way we can mimic the production of oxygen to extent that nature does. There's no way we can produce energy the way, photosynthesis the extent that nature does. And there's no way we can sequester and detoxify human industrial waste to the level that nature does it. And so what do we do? So is this just a pipe dream to imitate and to emulate nature, one of the properties of nature? And so we thought, well, we thought that maybe the solution is not so much to not to imitate 100%, but make use of nature, augment the built environment with nature. And so we came up with the idea that we should weave nature into our urban environment. That means, just like, two clasped hands, the one set of fingers will be nature, the other set of fingers will be urban environment, and that we have an ecological corridor that connects all these together, and then we equal fingers that weaves into the built environment and goes into the hinterland. And so this was a master plan for a site in the Reunion Island, which is east of Madagascar. The Reunion is it's French territory, and you can see the shapes of the urban fingers, and you can see the shapes of the vegetated fingers, and so that they're so close together, or not so close together, close enough so that the ecosystem services from the green areas benefits the urban areas. We did some studies, and we thought we experimented that the urban fingers would be about 30 meters maximum, and then the green fingers could be about 20 meters. And so in this way, as against, let's say, in London, where Hyde Park is miles away from Hackney, or Regent's Park is miles away from the bottom of London. And so this is the aerial view of the development. You can see the nature coming all the way up from the waterfront. We have a ecological finger corridor that picks up all the vegetation, brings it all the way up to the inner parts of the island, and then the urban areas goes all the way down. So this was the idea that we cannot imitate nature. We can imitate nature's abilities to provide ecosystem services, but we can augment the built environment with nature in close proximity so that the ecosystem services provided by nature is cheek by jowl with the urban areas. And we're trying to avoid, pristine edges because, species preferred, curvy, a sort of fuzzy, curvy linear edges. So there are places to hide, places to breed, and so forth. So the next aspect is eco-infrastructure. This is then another idea that we had, that ecological design is a seamless and benign biointegration of the series of infrastructures. The infrastructure is nature itself, which is itself considered as infrastructure, the hydrology of the natural environment, which is regarded as infrastructure, the built systems itself, and human society. And so all these four components are key infrastructures that need to be woven and biointegrated together. So the first one is nature itself as an infrastructure. The second is water, the hydrological regime. And then the third is our human society, our social, economic, political, and other institutions. And then the fourth is our built environment, the structures, and the infrastructure is both external. So these are, external, but obviously within buildings, the utilities within the building itself is infrastructure, but it's hidden because we hide it within the walls and within ducts and in the floor. And so these are different components of each of these infrastructure. And so ecological design is to integrate all these four into a whole. Now, obviously, this is the challenge of ecological design. This is easier said than done. But that is what ecological architecture should be. That means we biointegrate, synergistically biointegrate nature with our built environment, with our human society, and with the hydrology of the locality. Now, infrastructure then should drive what we do. And so if the existing city would have existing infrastructure and buildings attached to it, but the infrastructure of the existing city isn't green. And so a lot of architects, when you put green buildings in the city, they have to connect to some extent to the existing infrastructure, but you can never make a city green that way because, it's only partially effective. So the most important idea I want to leave in your head is that we should start by making our infrastructure green. And anything else we put into connected infrastructure, makes it easier to green the whole city. And so when you talk to a green designer, the first thing you need to ask them is, where does the energy come from? Where does the water come from? Where does the sewage go? And what's the telecommunication systems that you use? These itself should be green. So ecological design should start with making the infrastructure green and not just doing individual green buildings. And so back to the idea of the infrastructure, I color code them. I call nature infrastructure as there was a spelling mistake there. The green, the human as red because it's the color blood, the water to be blue, and eco-technology and our built environment as gray. This is a master plan that we did in Bangalore. On the right-hand side of the site, which is the western side, is a forest reserve. So the idea then was to collect all the diverse species in the ecological spine. Then we stretch it across the site as you would, stretch a strip of chewing gum. And then we're trying to link it to the adjoining sites so that we can try and interconnect as much of the plots as possible. This is the master plan for the scheme, and you can see the green infrastructure, which is which is green colored, and that's the spine, and we brought it across the site, and here it is stretching across to the other end. So this is the green infrastructure for this particular master plan. And so in our designing, with master plans, we start with the green eco infrastructure, and from there, then other infrastructures, are added. The gray is the road system, and then where it crisscrosses with the green, we would have ecological bridges and ecological undercrofts, and the water system goes underneath, and then this is the human society systems and the different activity zones. Now, next would be ecosystem hydrology, and for this project, this is the water reticulation system, but the white squares show the detention ponds where the water is brought back into the ground. And so my whole idea was that we try and close the loop as much as we can within the built environment. And then anything that we cannot reuse and recycle, we bring it back into the ground through a number of bioswales, through permeable paving, through rain gardens, and so forth. And so this is the, if you like, the cyclic system. And then for the black water or the sewage, we should have a constructed wetland, where we have a series of ponds, so that the black water flows from one pond to another pond, to the other pond, to the final pond. So in the process, it is cleaned, it is filtered, so that when the water reaches the final pond, it should be almost potable. The fourth characteristic that we should try and emulate is ecosystems responsiveness to climate. Now, the world consists of a number of climatic zones, and that determines the ecology of that location. And the ecosystems respond to the climate, and this determines the species of fauna, species of flora, determines the soil, determines the seasons of these particular localities. So the ecosystems respond, to the climate. Now, what we have in a cold climate, as where you are in the UK, is that you have a cold winter and you have a hot summer, and that's indicated by this dotted line, which is the blue dotted line. The red line is a straight line. This is what engineers want us to have. They want to have consistent temperature throughout the whole year, consistent air change, consistent internal conditions, and this is a high energy solution. And so what we should try and do is to try and optimize passive mode design, which is designing with the climate locality. And so as you can see, you have winter and the summer. These are two extreme seasons. You have the mid-seasons, which are nice time of the year. And so the full mode is the red line, and at the moment it uses mostly non-renewable energy, and that makes it a high energy situation. But through designing with climate, As you can see, some of the strategies that you can see on the right-hand side are proper shaping the built form, by orientation, by facade design, by optimizing ambient energies, and so forth. We're able to improve the comfort conditions a little bit. So that is the white line that you see there. And that's, but we should not delude ourselves that passive mode design or bioclimatic design can ever equal that red line. We can never achieve the red line. And so the next stage then would be, what happens if we use partial mechanical electrical systems? So I call this mixed mode, which is this dotted line. So we improve a little bit further. And ideally, we should use, the last would be what I call full, productive mode, where we use renewable energy. But we should try and get as close as we can. But in practice, it doesn't need to be 100% consistent throughout the whole year. You can vary a little bit. In winter, we can wear warmer clothes. In summer, we can, I'm not saying we're going to go around stockers, but you should wear less clothing, wear lighter clothing in the summer. And so productive mode is that dotted line on the right-hand side where we use renewable energy, solar energy, tidal energy, and wind energy. And so, if you like, this is how we can design, for low energy, nearing towards net zero energy in our built environment. Now, in London, we did the extension to the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, and the idea was to use natural ventilation to extend the mid-season as much as possible. Extend mid-season into winter so that it reduces the period for cooling, for heating winter. Extend the mid-season into the summer through the use of natural ventilation. And so here, this is the, oh, sorry, I got a little extra slides. It's got mixed up a bit. What happened here, I'm not sure. Firstly, did you change my slides?
No.
Huh?
No.
I don't know what's happened here. Anyway, the building that we did with mixed mode is, well, this is the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital extension. And as I mentioned, we should try and extend the mid-seasons. And the extended building is that part of the existing hospital. And what we did was to put a flue wall in front of the building, and the lower 3 floors are the coffee house and the lounges, which is occupied by, operated by Walt Disney, because this is a children's hospital. And so you can see the flue that on the outside, which sucks the air from the bottom and through these floors, and that's a valve at the top of the building that lets the air out. And so this is the valve at the bottom of the building, and that's the mixed mode system. Here's another building that we did in Beijing, which is a little bit above London. It's about 30 plus degrees above the equator. This is in the Xiong'an district of Beijing, which is about 40 minutes from Beijing itself. That's the location of the new capital city for Beijing, and that it is a renovation to an existing building. So this existing building, what we did was to create, punched a number of holes in the facade of the building so that it goes up into the central atrium. And so these are operated by adjustable, panels and vents, so to bring the natural ventilation to the inner parts of the building. This is the master plan of the site. And besides doing this, we started to look experiments into how we can locate the core positions in a high-rise tower. And from a whole series of core positions, central core, tilted floor plate, reconfigured, reorientated floor plates, cores at both ends of the building on the east and west side, the conclusion from these studies is that the core on the east and west side gives the building the lowest consumption of energy. So this is this tower that we did. You can see the the elevator core on one hand side and the other core on the other side, and the solar path is the one on the in the middle there. This building, this was completed back in 1986, so this is quite an old building. But one of the ideas I had was the idea that buildings should actually have a canopy on top of it, just like an umbrella. An umbrella actually is a very cybernetic device because depending on the direction of the wind and the rain and the snow, you can actually tilt the umbrella to keep out the sun, to keep out the rain, keep out the wind, depending on the conditions you want. And so this is my, if you like, my golden chalice, to do a building with an adjustable canopy that automatically changes and adjusts itself depending on the seasons of the year. And so these are different canopy designs that we did. This is canopy over a station. This is a master plan for a university in a competition that we won. And this is a university hub where we took the fritted glass pattern again, we put it horizontally, so it becomes, a canopy over the university hub. And it's what the canopy looks like. This is a canopy for the Xiong'an station, which is not built. Again, it is located about 40 minutes from Beijing. This is the master plan for the station, and this is the lower floor showing the greenery that connects up to the roof of the building. This is a building that we did back in 1985, and here we started to explore the idea of a louvered canopy, where it lets in the morning sun, keeps out the afternoon, the midday and the afternoon sun. And so this is on the eastern side, you can see it's shaped to let in the morning sun. When you look at the cross section, it keeps out the afternoon sun and the midday sun and the afternoon sun. And the whole idea was that the swimming pool then becomes an evaporative cooling device that brings cool air into the upper parts of the building. This is the plan of the building. It is perforated, if you like, north and south and east and west. And this is the passageway from the entrance of the building. This is a staircase that takes you up to the top of the building. And then we discover, little ideas such as the wing wall, where it deflects the wind from the southwest, from the southern part of the wing into the inner parts of the building. But if you look in the floor plan, the walls, if you like, are angled. This merges the insides of the building with the outside, so that it blurs the distinction between inside and outside. And so, if you like, the building becomes a series of indoor-outdoor courtyards, A and B, and and it was 2 other courtyards on the north and south. The building uses about 42 kilowatt-hours per square meter per annum, whereas an average house uses about 60, and office building uses about 131. So this the bioclimatic design principles, is effective in this building. But eventually, the idea would be, what happens if a building is 100% productive, which is something we're working on now, where the glass wall would have, the external wall would have embedded photovoltaics and solar cells. So the whole building itself becomes a power station, and that it doesn't need to have electrical energy from outside sources. And so then the eighth property is the cycling materials. It is more, if you like, a system of how we use materials, but it also affects the way we design the building, where the building should be designed for as DFE, designed for disassembly, so that the building components itself could be replaced and could be reused, and that is easy to disassemble. And so the idea was to close the loop as much as possible. The output is reused, recycled, and those that we cannot, we reintegrate back into the biosphere in a seamless and benign way. This is a diagram I've been working on. It's not 100% perfect, where the energy the non-renewable energy taken from the planet is used for different stages in the flow of materials of extraction. to processing, to manufacture, to distribution, to retail, to user, and then it is recycled back into different stages. And so, but this is something outside the scope of the architect. It is something that the city, the government, utilities, have to implement. And we're doing this in part where households start to separate the waste, and so that it is for recycling. And certain parts of London are very effective in doing this. But we should extend this to not just the household waste, but also to the building itself and its useful life. And so in this list of ecosystem attributes, the last 4, I've not able to get around to those yet. And they are just pending my agenda of things I have to do in our research. And so now I'm going to end in a minute. Essentially, these are the 4 principles that I discussed. Ecocentricity as designing based on the science of ecology, integration of our buildings and systems together, both physically and systemically. Ecomimicry means emulating, replicating, and augmenting ecosystem properties. And the last one, infrastructure as a way of designing our master plans and built environment. Now, we're still a long way to go. Here's a lady with an artificial prosthetic device, but it's early days. Can you imagine that at the moment it is just physical integration? To some extent, you can connect it to the muscles in the body, but we haven't been able to connect it to the nervous system and the other systems within the body, because if we connect it and we punctures the human organism, then it is as an open wound. It can become septic. It can, you have all sorts of issues. And so even with prosthetic devices, we have a long way to go. And this is just to remind you of the ecosystems. But actually, I've put a box around the human society, human community, because everything depends on us as human beings. Now, let's say in an ideal world, we got everything right. We designed the ideal, perfect ecological building where it biointegrates with nature. All the built systems are recyclable, reused, and have minimal impact on environment, and the water operates a closed cycle. But what happens if we as human beings, we don't behave, we don't respect nature, we continue to destroy nature? So at the end of the day, ecological design is not just architects and designers and engineers designing the best ecological buildings. The human society has to change, his lifestyle has to change, the food that he eats has to change, and the way it uses the natural environment has to change. And so at the end of the day, we are one of the key factors ourselves as human beings in ecological design.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Ken. It's a very inspiring and informative presentation, especially to all the students. I really admire your quotes by saying that you think buildings should imitate ecological systems. This I can concern that you always talk about ecology, sustainability, and green design in your buildings. Well, Dr. Ken, what role does poetry of architecture play in your work, Ken? Are you there, Dr. Ken?
What is your question again?
Right. Because I admire your quotes by saying that you think buildings should imitate ecological systems, Dr. Ken. So you are concerned about ecology, sustainability, and green design in your buildings. So what your role does poetry of architecture play in your work, Dr. Ken?
What role does?
Yes, what role does poetry of architecture playing in your work?
Or poetry? That's in the
Yeah,
design.
correct.
Yeah. So but there is long poets, there is short poets, and there are efficient poets. Now, what it means is this: if there's no poetry in it, then your design is very functional. It's like a prison. And so architecture is an art. And so what we do has to be aesthetically beautiful. But it must not be excessive so that it wastes material.
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the sake of iconic or to be signature, you waste material, then it's then it stops being ecological. So that is
Yes.
my answer to your question, that yes, poetry plays an important part, the poetics of architecture, because architecture is not just a craft, not just a building, it's also an art. And so the art
Yes.
must be there, but the art must not be excessively gratuitous,
Yes.
that
Indeed.
it is wasteful, and that it is blatant, blatant abuse of use of material.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Ken,
Yes,
because it's
sir.
very important for the students. Because
Yeah,
sometimes students, when they compose their design
yeah,
without the soul of it,
yeah.
but in the green design, a movement, a style, or something that we shouldn't incorporate for now on in every building. So, what say you? I mean, for me, what about your clients now? That there is so much awareness about the green design nowadays. Are they pushing harder for their contractors or even an architects to include this? Is it your office purpose the clients a green approach, or do they come to you because they know they are you doing this?
Valerie, I've been doing this since 1971,
Right.
and that when we started business in 1976, if you mention green architecture, people would think you're crazy. And so the easiest way to introduce green architecture uh, in the early years was biochromatic design, which is design with the climate. Now, when you design with climate, you start with a low energy passive mode building, and that is much easier to convince the client. Okay,
Right.
so that's how
Right.
we started. Now, this was back in 1976. It took nearly about 15 years. It wasn't until the late 90s that people started to get into green design. Up to the late 90s, we did everything ourselves. We did the energy calculation ourselves. We did the solar path calculation ourselves. But by the 90s, the M&E consultant uh, got into sustainable design. Then
Right.
architects, had an easy life. Architects would just design whatever they do, they give it to the M&E consultant and say, you make it green. And so, then the energy consultant would just stuff it with all sorts of, equipment and things to make it low energy, to make it, efficient. But as a result of doing this, the things you stuff in have very high embodied carbon. So, that defeats the purpose. Now, so we have to rethink how we design buildings. This is what I'm trying to tell, everyone. The other day I was in Amsterdam, and by the waterfront, they have a series of piers, and there's one of the piers, and I was looking across the window to a pier on the other side, and the
Mhm.
client says, those two buildings are by Zaha. And I said, oh, they're very nice because Zaha is a very talented designer. He said, they are super green buildings, they're platinum. But I said, those are exactly the same style that Zaha's been doing for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that she would design the building the way she's been designed. Then she gives the engineers, ask the engineers to get it accredited by LEED, accredited by BREEAM, and then that's it. And they call it the green building. What the point I want to make is that doing a green building has to start with ecology. That means you have to teach people ecology, you have to learn ecology, and once you learn ecology, the perception of the world changes. You don't look at the world anymore. When you look out in the grass, you look out in the open, you look at some trees, your whole perception of what happens outside is totally different. But how many schools of architecture teach ecology? How many schools of architecture in the world? I can only think
Yeah.
of maybe one or two.
Yeah.
And then, then I ask myself, how many architects have a background in ecology? Maybe again 1 or 2. But if you don't have the background in ecology and you don't teach ecology, what hope is there for the world?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've been trying to tell schools of architecture for a long time, for years. Teach ecology in your first year, and then and then let ecology drive the way you teach. So, for instance, let's say most schools of architecture teach materials. When they teach materials, they teach about how they're joined, how it's weathered, how it integrates, how it's detailed, you know. But if you
Okay.
teach materials as an ecologist, then you look at materials from source to site. That means, when you get the material to make the building material, then it has an impact on the environment, has an impact on energy, the energy of transporting to the factory to get fabrication to the site, and then the vehicle that takes to the site has to go back. It include the energy cost of that. And so that is teaching materials from the ecological point of view. Then at the end of the day, you have also think about what happens if you recycle the material and its useful life. But how many schools of architecture teach that? None. And so, the whole way of teaching has to change. But to get a school of architecture to change must come from the top. Now, to get the people from the top to change, somebody has to persuade them to do it. Somebody got to be so passionate that you go and tell the people at the top, says, you have to change the curriculum because it is good for the earth, it's good for the planet, it's good for the future, because we only got 20, 30 years left, or not even that. Now, that is just students. Maybe another 5 years before they start to practice. And then how about the architects in practice now? I've given a hope on all the architects in practice now because the everything's very superficial, and so my hope is with the next generation. So now back to this thing about until the late 90s, I was just doing low energy building. I was just doing bioclimatic building, and that's why a lot of books I wrote until in the late 90s were about low energy in passive mode and mixed mode. But it wasn't until the late 90s when everybody jumped up and says, we have to do something about the environment. We start to do sustainable buildings. And then, PAM got the GBI, the British got the BM, the Americans had the LEED, and then, China has CASB. And so by the early 2000s, I have clients coming to me to expect to give them a green building. So it took me from 71 to 2001, which was 30 years before I could really do green building. But even now, it's extremely difficult because only about 10% of my clients expect me to give a green building, but they don't understand the green building what it is, and so I have to do it surreptitiously, like a sort of subversively. So, for instance, when I did the National Library in Singapore. They didn't ask for a green building. I designed the green building for them. But then, nearing the completion of the building, the green mark came in. And so the CEO wanted the National Library to be accredited platinum. So they finally got the building accredited platinum. Then they said to me, then they tell everybody, well, I told Ken to design a green building in the first place. But actually, I've been doing a green building without telling them I've given you a green building. And so, that's what I do now. I do it surreptitiously. I see how far I can get. And then, when I can, do 100%, I do 100%. If not, then I have to find some other way to mitigate the intentions. So that is why this is so difficult. And then on top of that, for all the studies we do, we have an ecologist to work with us and all these building performance studies. The client's not going to pay for it. Nobody pays for it, And so, it's difficult collecting fees anyway, but getting extra fees to do that. So that means we don't make an awful lot of profit by being ecological architect because a lot of the money that we use goes into these sort of studies, into these sort of, analyses. And so,
understand that.
End of the day, if I live my life again, I wouldn't be an architect. I'd be want you to survey or something like that, you know.
Dr. Ken, there's a question from the student, a quite interesting question,
Yes.
How can the connection between artificial and naturally built environment be insinuated in modern society during the current post-COVID situation?
That's a strange question. Ask the question again. What is it?
How can the connection between artificial and natural built environment in a modern society during the current post-COVID situation into your design? It's a very interesting question here from students.
Well, there's a lot of things to be done. Most important thing, without going into balancing the batik with the abiotic, is natural ventilation.
Mm.
If you increase the natural ventilation, it enhances the it reduces the likelihood of getting COVID, because you're going to get stagnant air in the room. So to design for ventilation is very important, and design for cross ventilation in the tropics is much easier because you only got one season a year to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have in a cold climate, like a temperate or cold climate, and then you have insulation, you have to keep the air in, so you have to keep things circulated so that you don't get the virus being transferred from one person to another person. So things are a lot more complex in a temperate and cold climate. And but the first issue is ventilation, and it's not. We do it anyway because as an architect, let's say in the tropics, you design to enhance the cross ventilation and not to have still air in the building. Only thing about ventilation is that what is good for the wind is bad for the rain, because once you have cross ventilation, once it rains, the wind in some parts of the building can be so strong it blows it into the building, and then you have to shut the windows. Once you shut the window, then cross ventilation is gone. So you have to have a sort of a window system that lets the air through but keeps the water out. So just like it's like using what you call louvers which overlap. If this is one louver and the other one should overlap like this.
Yeah, the overlap.
So the air can go through, but it keeps the water from coming in. And so then you've got to have glass in between so the glass can go through. It's not impossible to do, but you have to be thinking about it. And then of course the louvers, the louver windows are actually quite good because it keeps the wind out. But if you have sufficient shading, you can keep out some of the overhang. You can keep out some of the rain as well. So,
right.
But it changes the way you think about architecture. It changes the way you detail buildings. It changes the way you identify spaces within the building. And so these are some of the things. Natural ventilation. The next would be balancing the batik with abiotic, because the room that you're in right now is 100% abiotic, 100% synthetic, 100% artificial. But if you look at nature, if you continue to build the same way we're building, and we're building the wrong sort of buildings, then the whole world will become artificial. And so we need to bring the natural and the artificial together, not just externally, also internally. But externally, you have to make sure that the species that you choose are non-invasive. Just like that. The Italian architect who did the tower in Milan, he says, "Oh, I got 1,000 species." But what species are these? Are they invasive species? The invasive species, just one invasive species can destroy the ecology of that locality. And so you got to be very careful with the species that you select, and then how to maintain, how to sustain. I mean, that beautiful project in Milan is a beautiful block of apartments. Apartments with beautiful design. But how do you service the planting? You have to have mountain climbers. Seriously, people who service the mountain climbers that jump from the top, they go from floor to floor to floor. Then the service, and then of course, by doing that, you lost privacy. So what we did was Solaris buildings that we had a ramp, with vegetation, then a walkway, Then the inside is your wall, so you can service the planting without going through the building, without going to usable areas. So that's very important. And connectivity is very important because in nature everything's connected.
Yeah, yeah,
And this
yeah.
is what COVID tells us, and that one person gets it, then the whole family and the whole group of friends we
Right.
get it as well, because in nature everything's connected.
Yes,
We
yes.
cannot we cannot see ourselves as being isolated.
Correct.
And so
Dr. Ken, there's a question here from the
yes, sir.
student Jian Sheng Pang. How biometric development should be carried out in an experiment within a way that the building will not look exactly like the thing you inspired from? Because we as a student, that when we inspire from something, sometimes the product or the result will looks very similar to the thing we inspired from. What say you, Dr. Ken?
I'm not sure what you mean actually. Inspired from what? You mean by analogy or by?
Could be, yeah, it could be. Because students always inspire something. When you look something, they feel something, they think something. But what say you when they experiment within the way that the building will look exactly like the thing that you inspired from?
I don't know. It depends on if the thing looks like a like a like a tea kettle, then is that a good inspiration? So I think relevance. You're talking about the aesthetics. So that is something altogether. Whether it's relevant or not, it's
Right.
important. But what is important is this. It's very important. I need to say this.
Yep.
And while I just focus on green design, you must remember that you're designing architecture for people.
Yeah.
And the
Agree.
sole purpose of a design of a building is to make people happy.
Yeah, I agree
Okay.
with that. 100% agree.
And so so you have to make people happy first, and then you can make it green at the same time. Now, making people happy doesn't have to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah.
You have to find out what makes people happy. The other day I was in Bordeaux, in the south of France, and between the town hall and the waterfront, there's a stretch of land, and it was maybe about 100 meters wide. And
Mm-hmm.
then between the town hall and the waterfront, there's a square which is about 100 meters, 100 meters. No, not 100 meters. We say about 60 meters, which
Yeah.
is which is tiled and sunk about 6 inches below the ground level.
Mm-hmm.
This ground level, and the ground level is here 6 inches below. But throughout this tiled area, at 2 meter intervals, are little jets, and that every 10 minutes, the jet pumps mist into the plaza, into this square. And so every 10 minutes, the whole square is covered with frothy mist. And I was there on a Sunday, and there were nearly about 200-300 people there. They were having a good time. They were laughing and singing. And then after 5 minutes, the water sinks down and is drained away, and then it starts all over again. It's a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful experience. It doesn't cost much to do this. It's just a piece of ground,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
tile with little jets, and it's sunk about 6 inches below the ground level. But
Yeah.
it gives
Yeah.
pleasure to people, and that is, so that means it doesn't cost money to do this.
Yeah.
Now, so we need to think about, what do we do? What can we design that makes people happy? Happiness is
Wonderful.
caused by the hormones that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the brain ejects. For instance, there are three or four hormones.
Yeah. Yeah.
One is, for instance, let's say if you hug somebody, that releases a certain hormone, and that gives a sense of happiness. If you give
100% agree. 100% agree.
if you give charity to people, then
Yeah.
you get something. And so you have to study the neuroscience of making people happy. Now, if
Right.
you
Right.
decide to make a building happy, then your whole purpose in life as an architect is fulfilled. Now, making it green is something that we do because it is good for the environment. We do it not because it makes money. We do it because it is an ethical thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And so, this is what we should be doing. Now we should just
Wonderful.
give a building, make it look good, follow, make it shaped like a teapot, shaped like shaped like a fire extinguisher, whatever it is, just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
So you have to ask, does it make people happy? If it doesn't make people happy, then why are we doing it? Because you want to do it, then it's very selfish. We should, you have to make people happy. The other day.
Totally agree, Dr. Ken. Totally agree.
Yeah, I did
You
a
remember
house.
that you, sorry?
I did a house in Johor for this, Australian couple. And then when Bob Powell visited the house for his book, he asked this Australian couple and the son and daughter, what do you think of this house that Ken designed for you? And they said, we are living in paradise. When Bob told me this, my whole purpose of being an architect is fulfilled. So that's the first priority. Making it green is like designing within cost, designing it is functional.
Yeah.
So an architecture to me must do four things. First, it must meet it must work.
Yeah.
Must functionally work. If a building doesn't work, then it's a useless building. So functionality is important. Second, it must meet criteria. Must be within cost, within time, meet authorities' requirements. Third, it must be immensely beautiful. Whatever a metaphor you use, whatever analogy you use, if it must look immensely beautiful. It must be green. So that is the fourth criteria. But the fifth one is the most important one. To say it must make people happy. If you meet these 5 criteria, to me, that's a good piece of architecture.
Yes, wonderful advice, Dr. Ken. Wonderful advice. You remember you texted me a few months back that you has produced the latest publication at one with nature, advances in ecological architecture in the work of yours. Behind you. I saw it behind you now.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It was behind you, yes.
Yeah. Can you get
so perhaps, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's published by John Wiley and Sons.
Yeah.
It's about 180 pages.
Right. So I really hope students can get this from bookstore.
Now it's especially designed so that every page is a double page spread.
Wonderful.
Okay, it's a double page spread, so that they're all double page spread.
Right.
So
wonderful.
You will never have seen a monograph or a project book designed this way. We designed it ourselves. It drove the publisher crazy, but every page is a double page spread, and that makes it unusual. Now the other book, I don't know whether you've seen, is this one.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Okay.
I bought it. Yeah.
This is the theory book. There's no projects in it. It's all text.
Yeah.
So the 2 books are companion books.
Wonderful.
So you should both of them together. Okay.
Okay, Dr. Ken.
Both of them.
So we're about to the finishing line here. The last from you, what will be your advice for the upcoming architects? I mean, for all the students, I always call them the future architects who are watching us now. Is there any advice, the last word from you, Dr. Ken, to all the future architects here?
Future architects.
Yes.
Well,
is there any final word? Yeah.
We are all servants of God. So whatever you do, it should be God's will. Okay? Whenever you design, seek guidance.
Seek guidance. Thank you so much. Very inspiring. Dr. Architect Ken Yang, thank you so much for your time. I know you are very busy. I think all the students and all the viewers here were so happy to hear your sharing session today. I mean, I'm personally honored, when I invite you to this platform. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contributions.
You're welcome.
So for all those,
Thank you
For
for
all
having
the
me.
students, yeah. Yes, thank you, Dr. Ken. So
Okay,
for all the
Adrian.
students, yeah, thank you so much. So remember, students, I mean, all the viewers here, remember, you are the architects and you also are the artists of your own life. So make sure, don't hand the paintbrush to anyone else. You are the one who created your own destiny. So with that, I pass back to Guma. But before that, I need to make a small announcement. I shall see you again on this coming Thursday, 7 October. We invited Tan Sri Datuk Sri Architect Isa Muhammad. He will share with the students and all the viewers about the planning and urban design process for architecture. 3 o'clock, 7 October, this coming Thursday. So with that, thank you, Dr. Ken, again. And I'll pass back to Guma. Masa, thank you so much. Be well, be safe, Dr. Ken.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Architect Adrianta, and thank you, Dr. Ken Young, for giving us an interesting and very eye-opening sharing, as well as giving us useful advice to young students and young architects. Well, I myself study wildlife management before I get into architectural studies, and I look forward to this ecological designs. And yeah, I think this is very wonderful sharing, and it will benefit a lot to the next generation. Okay, all right. So thank you again, Dr. Ken Young.
Thank you.
So this marks the end of our talk for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's online sharing session. And also, do join us this afternoon at 3 p.m. for ARCHIDEX online special session in conjunction with the World Architecture Day, where leading voices of the architectural industry shared in the industry outlook ahead and women in architecture and design. So you guys can click on the link in the comment to reserve your space. Okay, do keep in touch with us on Masa's Instagram and Facebook for more updates, and do check out ARCHIDEX online for more interesting webinar series. And also, if you haven't already done yet, you can also register for PAM membership at www.mypam.org.my. There are a lot of benefits for young architecture students that awaits. Until then, thank you again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good day and goodbye.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Be well. Bye.
Bye.
Be well. Bye. Thank you.